So, just as an Hadama, an introduction, once again, we have to keep in mind the extraordinarily destruction of the second temple, of the second Beis Hamikdash, and what it did to the memory of our people. Because as we saw in the previous Gemara regarding the belt, whether it's made out of shatnez, whether it's just linen, and nobody could remember exactly the way it actually was, we're going to get over here in the actual order of the avodah, of the service on the daily basis in the Beis Hamikdash. It's going to come up over here too. What came first, the chicken or the egg? At what point was the ketores, the incest, offered up? And there's a clear machlokes. And again, it needs to just be pointed out, when destruction happens, it is amazing, it's a human reality, that things get forgotten awfully quick on the details. The details get forgotten. Once we have that clear in our head, we can go. Says the Mishnah. So, we talked about that the Kohen Gadol 7 days before Yom Kippur gets sequestered. Number one, to make sure he doesn't become tamei, etc. Number two, because he's got to practice, right? We don't want him to just get to Yom Kippur without any practice. He needs to know what to do. So says the Mishnah, Kol Shivas Yomim, all 7 days of his sequester, who Zarek Esadam, he's the one who throws the blood of the carbon tumid. We are now on 14A2. 14A2. Umaktiris aketiris, and he burns the ketiris. Again, the reason for the throwing of the blood, because that, of course, as we've always learned, is the most important part, is the essential part of any service. Now, it happens to be that on Yom Kippur, he also did the shechita. He had to do everything. He had to do shechita, kabbalah, halicha, and zerika. Slaughtering, accepting the blood, carrying the blood, and sprinkling, because he was the only kohen doing the avodah. So as we're going to see, in fact, what he did on Yom Kippur was the kohen would start the shechita, and then he would stop. Another kohen would come to finish the shechita, while the kohen gadol ran and grabbed a clay sharis, a holy vessel, to capture the blood that was coming out of the shechita, because it's impossible to do a shechita and Kabbalah at the same time. So that's going to be part and parcel of the conversation that we're having over here. Umaktir es haketiris, and he burns the incest, the ketiris. Umeitiv es haneiros, and prepares the lamp. What this means, meitiv es haneiros, is a big machlokes. Does this mean simply cleaning out the lamps? Does this mean filling the lamps with oil? Does this mean the actual lighting of the menorah? Be it as it were, it was split into 2 pieces, 5 and 2. Barochas chamish neiros, barochas shnei neiros. You see in the morning, during Karbanos, we say something about Abaya hoya misader mishpah gemara aliba de Abishol. Abaya listed out the avodah according to Abishol, and in fact, this gemara that we're about to learn is that topic. So, whatever meitiv v'saneris is, leave that alone. Umakir v'sroish v'saregel, and he offered the head and the hind legs of the tamid offering. That's what was offered every day. Now, in fact, on Yom Kippur, he offered a lot more than that. He stood on the ramp and had to throw various pieces of the offering directly on top of the fire, or that was on top of the altar. But because we didn't want to tire him out during the 7 days, we limited his throwing to the stuff that was offered from the daily tamid offering. B'shar kol hayomim, on all other days of the year, im ratza la'akriv makriv, if the kohen gadol wanted to go ahead and do the avodah, he was allowed to. And even though there were other kohanim and it was their week to do the avodah, the Kohen Gadol has first rights at any time that he wants to do the avodah. Kohen Gadol makriv chelik b'rosh, for the Kohen Gadol has first rights. And he has the first rights to any portion of any sacrificial food. So even though these Kohanim are only there for a week, a Kohen Gadol is allowed to go ahead and step up to the front of the line to take during the regular part of the year from the sacrificial food. Good. So now, Zok the Gemara. Our Gemara clearly says that the Kohen Gadol was allowed to perform the avodah during the week of his sequestering, which means that while we were worried about him becoming Tomei, we weren't so worried that we didn't go ahead and begin to prepare him for his work that he would have to do on Yom Kippur. So my Tana, who's the Tana? Amar Rav Chizda, says the Gemara, Rav Chizda like Rabbi Akiva. This is clearly not Rabbi Akiva. The Rabbi Akiva, because if it was Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva holds that a Tor person upon which fell the mechatas of the paraduma, the water, the water of the paraduma's ashes, Timesai, becomes automatically Tomei. This is one of the interesting parts about the paraduma. It's mitar Tameim and it's mitama Ta'iris. It goes ahead and it's mitar those who are Tomei base, but the ones who deal with the paraduma themselves become Tomei. So now Rabbi Akiva says a Torah person who was not Tomei, a Torah person happens to get sprayed with the water of the paraduma, of which the water mixed with the ash, the mechatas, he automatically becomes Tomei. Here's the problem. The Kohen Gadol was sprayed with the mechatas of the paraduma all 7 days of his sequestration, all 7 days that he was sequestered, which would mean that the Kohen is becoming Tomei. What's going on over here? If he's Tomei, how was he able to do the sacrificial service? How could he do the sacrificial service if he's been sprayed with the mechatos and became Tomei? Good question. It says the Gemara. First of all, let's see where Rabbi Akiva came from. The Tanya, because we learned the pasuk says with regard to the mechatos of the paraduma, the Torah shall sprinkle it upon the Tomei. The Torah person shall sprinkle it on the Tomei. We are now on 14a3. 14a3. Al tar al hatomei tar. It's only when it's sprinkled on a person who is Tomei that he becomes tar. But if he sprinkled it on a tar person, the tar person becomes Tomei. Divin Rabbi Akiva, and since our Kohen Gadol gets sprayed with this during the 7 days of the sequester, by definition he's Tomei according to Rabbi Akiva, which means he should be unable to do any avodah. But the Chachamim say, these sprinklings apply only to things that are susceptible to be susceptible to be Mekabel Toma. That means, okay, when one sprinkles, for an example, on things that are not susceptible to Kabel Toma, for an example, an animal, that act has no legal characteristics of sprinkling. So the nafkamina would be, if you look at the article explains it very well. Article number 15, second paragraph. The practical significance is as follows. As a general rule, the paraduma or its ashes may not be used for general work, right? If they are subject to general work, they become disqualified. So when one dabs the mechatas into the branches, into the hyssop branches, and for some reason the act is not legally classified as sprinkling, it therefore becomes classified as work, which would result that any of the mechatas that is on the branch, on the broom, by definition, would become disqualified. So there we have our nafkamina. So this recur, the rest of it has to be removed from the branch, and the branch must be immersed again in the rest back into the vessel containing the rest of the mechatos, which means you're going to use up the mechatos a lot faster. When a proper act of sprinkling has occurred, then it doesn't have to be redipped. You can keep on using it until it dries out. In short, so says the Gemara, back to the Gemara, what do we learn out from the Rabbanan? It's not. If one intended to sprinkle the mechatas on a behema, which is completely unnecessary because a live animal does not become tamei, and therefore the sprinkling of the mechatas is a waste, and this would disqualify it as work. But lamaisa, the hiza ala adam, even though his intention was to spray it on an animal, he ended up spraying it on a person. Im yesh be'ezai, if there's still more mechatas left on the branch, Yishana, he's allowed to go ahead and use the remaining mechatas that's on the branch. His thought process was for an animal. We don't look at the thought process. We look at only the actual action. The actual action was that he sprayed it on a person. He sprayed it on a person. It's all good, and obviously the person was tamei, so therefore it's good. What about this chaven lahazit salodam? He had in mind to do it on a person, but lamaisa in reality he sprayed it on an animal. You're not allowed to use the remaining because it became invalidated. So now the Gemara says, okay, I understand the Rabbanan, but my comment to Rabbi Akiva, why does he say that the mechatas of the Torah Aduma, when it's sprinkled on a Torah person, makes that person tamei? Says the Gemara, Nichtav Rachmana bihiza hatar olav. The Torah, the merciful one, the Torah Kedusha, could have only said the Torah person shall sprinkle the mechatas upon him. My al hatamei. What's the extra word upon the tamei, upon the contaminated? I mean, logically, obviously, you're spraying the mechates on somebody that's tomameis, that's contaminated from a corpse. So you don't have to say it straight out. I'm spraying ala tome. Just say Allah, one word on him. What's the ala tome? Shema mina, ala tome tar, ala tar tome. So now the Gemara says, you know what? Rabbi Akiva just made a very good diuk. He just looked at the pasuk and he made a very good explanation of the pasuk. In that case, the Rabbanan, what are the Rabbanan going to do with the extra words ala tamei? According to them too, it should have also said olav. Says the Gemara, ahul idbarim hamikablam tamahu also. It's coming to teach us the idea that you only have a problem with when it's sprinkled on things that are susceptible to tumah contamination. But in the case of Rabbi Akiva, where the water was sprinkled on a tar person, and the only question is, does this tar person now become tamei? Kal v'chayla, we've got a kal v'chayla. In ala tar, tamei tar, if this mechatas is sprinkled on a tamei person, a person who is contaminated with tumas mace, with corpse contamination, if he gets sprayed with the mechatas of the paraduma, becomes tar, then certainly ala tar, like Koske, if it gets sprinkled on somebody who's already tar, there is no question that he would remain tar. Rabbi Akiva, so that's a great kal v'chayla. So Rabbi Akiva will say, what are you going to do with this kal v'chayla, Rabbi Akiva? Says the Gemara, to come a shmua and slima. It's regard to this specific kal v'chayla regarding the paraduma, that the wisest of men, Shlomo HaMelech, said in Keheles, Amarti achachma v'hu rechoik mimeni. I said I would become wise, but later it's still beyond me. What is he talking about? We're now 14:8:4, and Shlomo HaMelech, despite his great wisdom, cannot explain why we have this rule that the mechatos is mitar temeim, but is metavo tahirim, that it mitar, it purifies those who are contaminated, but it contaminates those that are pure. Right. He said that's one of the things that he said. So in other words, Shlomo Melech said, yes, we have this wonderful Kal V'Chomer, but in reality, it doesn't work that way. The Rabbanon, what are the Rabbanon going to do with Shlomo Melech's, in the words of the Art Scroll, exclamation of amazement? In other words, saying, I was wise and I still don't understand why it's mitar to Meir, but it's mitama to Oirim. Says the Gemara. No, the Rabbanan would argue that pasuk of Shlomo Melech is coming to discuss this. Ahu lamazu lamazin alav tahar. The pasuk is coming that the one who sprinkles the water and the one upon whom they sprinkle the water are both tar. But one who touches the water directly becomes tameh. So, pray the Gemara, is that a fact? The one who sprinkles the water remains tar. And it says, and the one who sprinkles the sprinkling water shall immerse his garments, which means if he does become tameh, in other words, it's mitameh tahirim. The one who just deals with the mechatos becomes tameh, even if he doesn't touch it. Says the word, no. What does it mean, sprinkle? It means noiga, that he touched it. Says the Gemara, if that's true, but in fact, it's written. In fact, it's written one who sprinkles, and further in the same pasuk it says one who touches. So they can't be one and the same. It's in the same pasuk. Everybody look at number 30 in the Art Scroll. It has the pasuk. Umaze meinida yichabitz begodov. V'hanogeya b'meinida yitamar aref. Look at the English. One who sprinkles the sprinkling water shall immerse his garments. Kama. And the one who touches the sprinkling water shall be tameh until evening. Clearly, there's a big difference between simply sprinkling and actual touching. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Zakti Gemara, now the Rabbanan would tell you, Hakamashvala, the beginning and sheer azar. The pasuk is only coming to tell us that the amount of water that goes onto the high sap branch, onto the branch to sprinkle, we need the amount needed. It needs to be equal to amount that can be metame. Whatever the sheer tuma is, that's the amount that has to go on the branch for sprinkling. That's a good answer, according to the one that says Yoma Hazot Tzarich Shear, who says the sprinkling of the sprinkled waters needs a shear, a minimum amount. But according to the one that says there is no minimum amount that's required, what is he going to say? Says the we're holding on 14.8.4. 14.8.4, you down it on the Aleph all the way on the bottom. So says the Gemara, even according to the one that says sprinkling, the actual, let me underline that word, the actual sprinkling, the actual spritzing does not require a minimum shear, a minimum amount. Even if you sprinkle onto him literally a drop, that's enough to be mitar. That is enough to make him uncontaminated, to make him purified. But the vessel holding the water, in the clay assurance, in the holy vessel that's holding the mechatos, a certain amount of water is required. In other words, while the actual spraying onto the person could be done with a mashu, could be done with a drop, nonetheless, the amount that you need to bring to the game is at the very least a shear that could be metaba. Let's call it a revius. You got to start with a revius. Doesn't mean you're going to use a revius, but you got to start a revius. It's similar to a baseball game, kaviyachol, where they bring like 100 baseballs to a game. Not because they actually expect to use 100 baseballs to a game, but because it might happen that you need it So they put it there. There might be a lot of foul balls or whatever it is. I'll let over here the same thing. The amount of water you have to bring to the game of purifying those who are tama mace, those who are metama with corpse contamination, you got to bring at least a minimum amount that could be metama, about a revius. Now, what you're actually going to use, that's a different story. So therefore, the kasha about Maze and Noga doesn't get off the ground quickly, because again, the question was, he said answering because he holds is a shear. The minimum amount is not necessary for the actual spraying, but for the actual bringing, how much has to be on at the place, that even he agrees it requires a shear. And says the Gemara Baita, we're right on the bottom. It's not because we learned how much volume must it be in the water, so that there should be enough. That's considered the amount needed for sprinkling. This is a Mishnah in Mesechus Para. Enough that one can dip. We are now on Amid Beis, Yudaled Amid Beis, 14b1. Roishe Gevulet Biyazim. That the tips of the stems on top of the hyssop branches can get enough water to be soaked enough to sprinkle. So in other words, you have to have enough water that all the tips of the branches can get wet. The fact that you might only sprinkle one little drop, that's the sprinkling, but the touching is things. So now, the Gemara concludes that the Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, the Kohen Gadol, who is Tahar, gets sprinkled by the Mei Chatas, automatically becomes Tamei, because a Tahar person that gets sprinkled by the Mei Chatas, it's Metame Tahirim, it's Metame Tahirim. So now the Kohen Gadol is standing here during the sequester, when he's sprayed every single day with the Mei Chatas and he's tar, he therefore is going to become Tamei, which means that he cannot do the Avodah. He cannot go ahead and serve and bring the carbon Tamid and the Ketairis and do things for the Menorah, etc., etc. Like our Mishnah said, he practices during the 7 days of sequestration. Elamai can't be Rabbi Akiva. Yes, it could. Rabbi Akiva. The Kohen Gadol is sprayed with the mechatas, which makes him contaminated. So how can he do the avodah? It says Abaya, because they do everything opposite. The Ovid avodah kula Yoma. He does the avodah a whole day. And then towards evening, after he finishes bringing the carbon, Tomid Shalbeino Arbayim, after he brings the afternoon Tomid and finishes the avodah of the day, then they would sprinkle him with the mechatos, and then he would become Tomid, which then meant he became big tovel, and then he would go to the mikvah, which would make him a tavul yoim. So let's say they sprinkle him at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. He becomes tamei. At 5:30, he goes to the mikvah. He becomes a tavul yoim. And now all he has to do is wait till Ma'ariv. It becomes Harav Shemesh. When nighttime comes, he's tar again. The tavul be'ovid Harav Shemesh, and he waits for the sun to set. At which time he'll become tar again. And the next day they repeat. He does the avodah the next day. When he finishes doing the avodah, they spray him with the mechatos. Because who said you have to spray him with the mechatos at the beginning of the day? They said they sprayed him all 7 days. They sprayed him all 7 days of the sequester. Fine. Spray him in the afternoon after the avodah. Abaya very elegantly comes up with a complete answer. That's a simple answer and solves the problem. Now, the Mishnah goes again further. And again, the Mishnah says, during the 7 days of the sequester, He goes ahead and offers up the incest. He burns the incest on the altar. And prepares the nails. So again, I'm going to make the point. The great destruction happened of the Churban Bayesheni, and they forgot. They forgot the details of the order of the Avodah. Every morning we say in Kabbanas, Abaya Hoya Misada, Seda HaMaracha, Aliba de Abishol, according to Abishol. Remember that. We're going to refer back to that. I don't know if it's today or tomorrow, but I think it's going to be probably today. We're going to bang into it. And that's the idea. It was Aliba de Abishol according to Abishol. There were other opinions. Again, the preparing of the lamps were done in two different pieces, 5 and 2. They would prepare 5 of the lamps of the menorah, of the 7 lamps of the menorah, 5 of the lamps, and then after the Ketaitis, apparently, they would do 2 more. Having said what I just said, that's up for a discussion. So now let's learn the Gemara. So the Mishnah says, Hamaktir Ketaitis, he offered the incest, who made to his and prepared the lamps. Alma, apparently, our Mishnah seems to be saying, Ketaitis Bereisha Bahadeneris. That means first, the Kayan burns the incest. That goes first in the Avodah. And this next thing in the Avodah then turns out dealing with the menorah and its various lamps. Says the Gemara, very no, but I got a question, because there's a Masechta called Masechtas Tamid, which obviously is about the carbon Tamid, which is actually on a more broader basis. Masechtas Tamid is about the daily avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, and there Masechtas Tamid in the 3rd parak and in the 5th parak, it talks about the various piouses, lotteries. As you know, every week there was a mishmar that did the avodah. 24 mishmaris twice a year. The Ghana was broken into 24 mishmars, and they served 2 weeks of a year, once at the beginning of the year, once at the end. Then within that mishmar, there's base ofs. There are family groups. Within those family groups, there's individuals. Every base of got a day of the week to do it. And on Shabbos, they all did it together. Now, how did they parcel out the avodas to all the people of their group? They did lotteries. There were 4 different lotteries at any given point in the day. Who's going to take the ash? Who's going to do the carbon tamid, etc. And especially the Ketairis. Because the Ketairis came along with an unbelievable skula. Whoever brought the Ketairis was guaranteed to become rich. That was built into the Ketairis. The Kohen who brought the Ketairis would eventually become rich. So they made it impossible. They tried to get it that every single Kohen should get a chance to at least once in his lifetime offer up the Ketairis. So that was part and parcel of this whole thing. So anyway, very minu, says the Gemara, the Mishnah Masechtas Tamid, we've got a contradiction, a stira. Look what it says. The Kohen who won the lottery for the privilege of cleaning the ash from the Mizbeach HaPanimi, the Mizbeach HaZav, the golden Mizbeach, the 1 by 1 amma, 1 amma by 1 amma Mizbeach in the inside, in the Heichal. The one who had the privilege of preparing the lamps. And the one who won the privilege of burning the incense. Does everybody notice what came first in the Mishnah and Masechtas Tamid? First came the menorah, and only afterwards came the Ketairis. And in our Mishnah it says, who made they burn the incense and then prepare the lamps. And in Tamid, it clearly seems to be saying that the lottery was first for the menorah, and then the next lottery was for the Ketairis, which meant that cleaning out the menorah was first, and the Ketairis was second. So now we've got to see which avodah came first, the chicken or the head. What came first? The Menorah and then the Ketairis? Or no, the Ketairis and then the Menorah. So what's going on? Amar Rav Huna, Man Tana Tamid. Who's the Tana and Tamid? Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvahu. It's Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvahu. Okay, as we're going to see a little further along. So, Rav Huna is making a suggestion because he says Shimon Ish HaMitzvah was one who said a lot of memories regarding the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. So he said, I'm going to assume that the Mishnah in Tamid reflects this individual Tana of Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, but our Mishnah, which has a different order, i.e. that the Ketairis come before the Menorah, is in fact the Shita of the Rabbanon, who obviously are the majority. So thank you, Gemara, but in fact, we've received learning from Rav Shimon ben Ish HaMitzvah that are just the opposite of the Mishnah in Masechtas Tamid. And I'll show you. So how could you, Rav Huna, say that Mistam, probably Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, is the Tana of the individual Tana of the Mishnah in Masechtas Tamid? It's not, because we learned in Masechtas Tamid. This is the beginning of the fourth parak. The Kohen who won the lottery to throw the blood of the Karban Tamid arrived at Mizrachit Savinus, the northeast corner of the Mizbeach. Noisen Mizrachit Savinus. And standing over there, he threw the blood on that northeast corner, which means he covered both the north and the east. Then he circled the Mizbeach. He got to the southwest corner and he threw blood upon the southwest corner. So that means he made Shnei Shehem Arba. He threw two Zerikas that turned out to really be four. In other words, everybody picture a corner, a Keren Zovius in the Lashon of the Gemara. A corner. A corner, by definition, has two sides to it. In the top part, it's the northeast. On the bottom part, it's the southwest. So when he sprayed on the corner, automatically the blood went onto two sides, the north and the east, and on the other side, the south and the west. So it was Shnayim Shehem Arba, two sprayings that turned out to be four avoidus, all four corners of the Mizbeach. V'tanala. And on this very Mishnah, we learned the Baraisa, Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, Mishanet V'tamid. Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah changed the proceedings with regard to the Karban Tamid. 14b2. 14b2. And he said that, in fact, you're right. Normally, there were two that were four. The northeast corner and the southwest corner. And that's the way we got to all four corners, all four sides of the Mizbeach. But the Karban Tamid is different. The Karban Tamid goes like this. Mizrachis Savinus, the northeast corner, nice of Mizrachis Savinus. I'm granting you. The northeast corner, he gets to the northeast corner and he sprays towards the northeast corner. So you got the north side of the Mizbeach and the east side of the Mizbeach with one spray. But when he keeps circling the Mizbeach, and he gets to the southwest corner, first he places the blood on the west wall, and then he puts on the south wall. So according to Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, in fact, it's Shloisha Shehei Marba. It's three sprinklings that equal, well, three pourings actually, that equal four. One on the northeast, but two. One on the west wall and one on the south wall. So we see that Rav Shimon ben Ish HaMitzvah takes a position that's completely at odds with the Mishnah in Masechtas Tamid. So obviously that the author of the Mishnah is in Masechtas Tamid cannot be Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, because in fact we find a case where the Mishnah, the Stam Mishnah, The Mishnah that doesn't have an anonymous author in Talmud clearly says that it's Shnayim Shehem Arba, 2 springs, each on the opposite corners that equal 4. Rav Shimon Isha Mitzvah says it's 3 springs, Shloisha Shehem Arba, 3 that equal 4, which is different than the Mishnah in Talmud. So clearly he can't be the Stam, the anonymous author of the Mishnah in Talmud. If that's the case, what are you going to do with him? In other words, we're back to our question that the Mishnah in Talmud, I don't know who it is, and it clearly contradicts our Mishnah that says the Ketairis comes first and then the Menorah, while the Mishnah in Talmud says the Menorah comes first and then the Ketairis. So says the Gemara, Elo Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Man Tana say the Yoma, who's the Tana of our Mishnahs over here in Masechtas Yoma? Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah. Then in fact we have Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah. But in fact, it's Rav Shimon Ish HaMitzvah that says the Ketairis comes before the Menorah. But the Mishnayos in Masechtas Talmud is in fact the Rabbanah, the majority, and they say the Menorah comes before the Ketairis. Now, very nice. So now, having explained the stira between Masechtas Yoma and Masechtas Talmud, the Gemara says, while we're at it, can we please look at our own Masechta, Masechtas Yoma, which we're learning right now? I've got a problem here. The Rami say the Yoma, but I've got a problem with the explanation of the order of the Avodah, from the order of the Avodah somewhere else in Yoma. It's not because we learned, and this Mishnah is on Chav Hei Amid Aleph. Chav Hei Amid Aleph is a very, very interesting daf. It's a daf that talks about the pious, the lotteries that we talked about before, about the Avodah. What makes it very interesting that on that daf, as we're going to see from a Tosfos, on that Amid is the place where we get the idea that you're supposed to wear a hat when you come into a shul. Where did this Jewish minute come about wearing hats when you walk into a shul? It turns out it comes from the Kahanim and it comes from a Tosfos on Daf Chafei. But that's for next week or later. That's in 11 daf. For the purposes of now, over here, the Mishnah says, Payis Hasheni mi shoichet. The second lottery determines who will slaughter the Talmud. Who will throw the blood onto the altar from the carbon Talmud? Who will do the zrika? Who's going to clear the ash from the inside Mizbech, the Mizbech HaPanimi, the Mizbech HaZov that's in the Heichal? Who will clear out the ashes of the menorah? Which means what just came first here, the menorah? Who will bring the limbs of the Talmud up onto the ramp? And the next Mishnah goes, Payis HaShalishi, the third lottery, those who are new to the Ketairis come and draw lots. And again, that's because the Ketairis had this wonderful thing that the school that whoever brought the Ketairis, whoever did the Avodah Ketairis became rich. So any new Kahanim that came who had never done the Avodah of the Ketairis before, they were the ones that were involved in this lottery so that they should get a shot to go ahead and to at least brought the Ketairis once in their lifetime. But what do we see? That in the second lottery, they dealt with the menorah, and it's only in the third lottery that they dealt with the Ketairis. So now I've got to steer between that Mishnah on Daf Chafei and our Mishnah over here on Daf Yudalit that clearly said, Hamachtir is a Ketairis made to the that first you first burned the Ketairis and then you clean the neiris. And over there it's clear, it says that the second lottery is for the menorah and the third lottery is for the Ketairis. A complete contradiction. Amar Abaya, no problem. Loi kasha, it's not a question. Kan v'atova shnei neiris. Here in our Mishnah, we're talking about preparing the last two lamps of the menorah. Over there, it's referring to preparing the first 5 lamps of the menorah. In other words, if you remember, I said that the avodah of the lamps of the menorah was split into 5 and 2. 5 were done before, 2 were done later. So now we said, and if you take a look, again, in the mornings when we say Kabbanis and you get to Abaya, right, you're going to see over there, it talks about Chamesh Neres, Shtei Neres. Now you know exactly what it's talking about. So therefore, the two missions are not a steer, not a contradiction. For the first 5 lamps were prepared before the burning of the incense of the Ketairis, and the final 2 lamps were prepared after the burning of the incense. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. So are you telling me that the burning of the Ketairis, the offering up of the Ketairis on the Mizbeach, was the thing that separates between the 5 and the 2? Is that true? Now here we come to what we say every morning. We are now on 14b3, heading to the end of the Yomid. But Abaye himself listed the daily offering, the order of the daily offerings, based on the tradition received in the yeshiva. And if you take over there that the 2 sages, the 5 lamps, and then the 2 lamps were separated by the zerikas hadam of the carbon tamid, the throwing of the blood onto the mizbeach of the carbon tamid, not the hectic ketairis, not the burning of the ketairis. Amri lo kasha says, well, it's not a kasha. Ahula b'shol. Because Abaya, you stop saying the whole thing. It goes, Abaya Mesada Maroch Mishmei Gemara Liba de Abishol. That's according Abaya is saying, according to the Shita of Abishol, that it's the Zurika Saddam of the carbon tumid, the sprinkling of the blood onto the Mizbeach that separates the preparing of the 5 lamps and the 2 lamps. That's according to Abishol. Oh, the Rabbanon. Our mission is the Rabbanon. And the Rabbanon are saying it's the Ketairis that splits between the 5 lamps and the 2 lamps. And we can see the Tanya, because we learn one should not prepare all the lamps of the menorah and then burn the Ketairis. Rather, one should burn the ketairis after preparing just 5 of the cups, and afterwards finish the remaining 2. Abishol says, one should prepare all 7 first, and afterwards burn the incense, for it's the throwing of the blood of the tamid, the zerikas hadam of the tamid, not the burning of the incense, according to Abishol, that interrupts the cleaning of the lamps. 5, sprinkle the dam of the tamid on the mizbeach, and then do the other 2. The opponents say no, do 5, burn the ketairis, and then bring the other 2. And we're going to stop right over here because we're on the bottom of the Amid. My Tamid the Abishol, what's Pshat of Abishol, and we'll continue on to tomorrow's